With a definitive, hollow hiss, the seals on the Grand Chamber doors gave way. The Terran delegation rose in perfect, terrifying unison, signaling that the era of retreat and surrender had ended. As Ambassador Rhodes buttoned his jacket, the Alien Council arrived at a chilling realization. The humans were no longer playing by the rules. The air inside the Zenith Pavilion was meant to be perfectly calibrated for the comfort of all 14 species of the Galactic Concordat. But to Ambassador Roger Rhodes, it felt thick, stale, and suffocating. The pavilion hung in geostationary orbit above the neutral gas giant of Oakhaven, a shimmering architectural marvel of glass and obsidian metal. It was a place where civilizations came to end their conflicts with dignity, or, as Roger was quickly realizing, a place where humanity was expected to sign its own death warrant. He stared down at the glowing holographic text of the Zenith Accords. The terms were draconian. Under the guise of a permanent peacekeeping initiative, the Concordat was demanding the complete dismantling of the Terran Defense Coalition's deep space fleet. Earth would be permitted to maintain atmospheric fighters, effectively glorified police cruisers, but nothing capable of slipspace travel. Furthermore, humanity's heavy industry colonies on Reach and the outer asteroid belts would be placed under the stewardship of Concordat overseers. It was subjugation, wrapped in the polite, sterile language of diplomacy. Across the vast, circular obsidian table sat High Minister Xylar of the Kalanid hegemony. Xylar's species was tall, multi-limbed, and covered in a fine, iridescent scaling that shifted colors depending on their emotional state. Right now, Xylar's scales were a cool, contemptuous indigo. The Kalanids led the Concordat, and they had led the brutal 4-year war of attrition against humanity. The terms are quite generous, Ambassador Rhodes. Xylar's translation caller synthesized, the voice a smooth, artificial baritone. Given the events at the Sirius sector, your government should be eager to halt the bloodshed. We have provided you with a path to survival. We ask only for your compliance. Roger kept his face impassive, a mask of stone he had perfected over decades of diplomatic service in Geneva and Washington. Inside, however, his stomach churned. The events at the Sirius sector had been a massacre. The Concordat had overwhelmed Admiral Arthur Collins's fleet, reducing 3 human colonies to glass and ash. Millions had perished in a single weekend. It was the crushing blow that had brought President Harrison to her knees, forcing Earth to the negotiating table. Beside Roger, General Thomas Croft shifted in his chair. Croft was a man carved from granite, a veteran of the early border skirmishes, and he had been silently seething since they arrived. His knuckles were white as he gripped the edge of the table. "Generous," Croft muttered under his breath, leaning forward just enough to let the ambient microphones pick up his gruff voice. "You call the occupation of our sovereign shipyards generous. You want to strip our teeth so you can eat us at your leisure." General Croft, a sharp, clicking voice, echoed from the other side of the table. It belonged to Fleet Commander Vreen, a mantis-like insectoid whose species served as the Concordat's primary military enforcers. "You are an exhausted, cornered animal. Your economy is collapsing. Your hyperlanes are blockaded. We are not asking for your teeth. We are simply removing them before you bite yourselves." Dr. Evelyn Wright, the third member of the Terran delegation and Earth's foremost expert on xenopsychology, placed a gentle hand on Croft's forearm. It was a subtle gesture, a silent plea to hold his temper. Evelyn was a pragmatist. She knew the numbers. Humanity had fought with unprecedented ferocity, surprising the galaxy with their tactical ingenuity and sheer stubbornness. But a single planet and a handful of colonies could not outproduce a coalition of 14 star systems. "High Minister," Roger began, his voice calm, projecting the quiet authority of a man who still believed he had ground to stand on. "The Terran Coalition is fully committed to a peaceful resolution. However, Clause 4, Section 9, the dismantling of our slipspace drives, is a non-starter. Our economy relies on deep space mining. Without slipspace logistics, billions on Earth will starve within a decade. We cannot sign an agreement that trades sudden death for slow starvation." Xylar steepled his 4 upper hands. The indigo scales rippled with a flash of violet amusement. "Ambassador, the Concordat will provide food rations. You will be a protected protectorate. But you have proven too volatile, too. Emotionally erratic to possess interstellar capabilities. You expanded too quickly. You fought too savagely. The galaxy requires order." "The galaxy requires submission, you mean?" Croft growled. "We are offering peace," Xylar stated, ignoring the general. He leaned forward, his black, pupilless eyes locking onto Roger's. You have exactly 1 solar hour to confer with your government and sign the accords. If the accords remain unsigned by the turning of the cycle, the Concordate Armada stationed at the edge of your sol system will advance. Earth will not be glassed, Ambassador. It will be dismantled, city by city, until you learn obedience. The threat hung in the sterile air, heavy and absolute. Roger looked at the timer glowing in the center of the table. 60 minutes. 60 minutes to surrender human independence forever, or watch Earth burn. He stood up slowly, picking up his encrypted datapad. We will take our recess, Roger said, his voice flat. Without waiting for a dismissal, Roger turned and walked toward the massive blast doors of the chamber. Croft and Evelyn followed close behind. The doors slid open, and the human delegation stepped out into the long, arching corridors of the station. They could feel the eyes of dozens of alien diplomats, aides, and guards burning into their backs. The humans were a spectacle, a dying breed taking their last breaths on the galactic stage. The Terran delegation's secure suite was a sterile, windowless bunker meant to ensure privacy. As soon as the heavy acoustic doors locked behind them, General Croft slammed his fist against the reinforced steel wall. The dull thud echoed through the small room. It's a slaughterhouse disguised as a courtroom, Croft snarled, pacing the length of the floor. They don't want peace, Roger. They want a pet. They want to put us on a leash and watch us beg for our own grain. We know, Thomas, Evelyn said softly, rubbing her temples. She walked over to the small beverage dispenser and poured a glass of synthetic water, but Xylar isn't bluffing. Our long-range telemetry confirms it. The Kalanid Armada is holding position just outside the Oort cloud. 300 capital ships. We have maybe 40 cruisers left to defend Earth, and half of them are held together by duct tape and prayers. If they push forward, orbital defenses will fall in under an hour. Roger sank into a low chair, staring at the blank screen of his datapad. The crushing weight of the moment felt like a physical pressure in his chest. He thought of his daughter Sarah, who was currently in a medical bunker in London, coordinating triage for refugees from the outer colonies. He thought of President Harrison, pacing the floor of the underground command center in Cheyenne Mountain, waiting for Roger's call. If I sign it, Roger whispered, staring at his hands, I condemn humanity to slavery. We become a vassal species. Our history, our progress, it just ends here. And if you don't sign it, Evelyn replied gently, humanity just ends. Full stop. They won't leave a single city standing. They want to make an example of us to keep the other client species in line. Croft stopped pacing and looked at them both, his jaw tight. I'd rather die on my feet than live on my knees feeding Kalanid overseers. It's not just your life you're trading away, General, Roger snapped, the stress finally cracking his calm veneer. It's 12 billion lives. It's the children. It's the future. Before Croft could retort, a sharp, high-frequency chime cut through the tension. It was coming from Roger's secure datapad. Not a standard comms ping, but the specific, triple-burst tone of an alpha-black quantum transmission. It bypassed the station's dampening fields entirely, utilizing entangled particles that instantly mirrored data from Earth Command. Only President Harrison and a handful of top-tier military brass had the clearance to send an alpha-black. Roger picked up the pad, his brow furrowing. He authenticated the message with a retinal scan and a blood prick from his thumb. The screen lit up. It wasn't a text document. It was a live video feed, heavily encrypted and degraded, but clear enough. Captain Gregory Higgins, the president's chief intelligence attaché, appeared on the screen. He was standing in the Cheyenne Mountain war room. The background was a flurry of chaotic, silent activity, but Higgins didn't look panicked. He looked pale, shaken, but not with fear. He looked like a man who had just witnessed a miracle, or a monster, and couldn't tell the difference. Ambassador Rhodes. Higgins's voice crackled through the secure earpiece Roger had quickly put in. Can you hear me? I hear you, Gregory. The clock is ticking here. Has the president made a decision on the accords? The accords are void, sir, Higgins said, his voice trembling slightly. Roger's heart dropped into his stomach. Void? What do you mean void? Did the Armada advance? They did, sir, 20 minutes ago. Our spies in the Kalanid ranks warned us they were never going to honor the hour. They began their slip-space jump into the Sol system while you were at the table. They intended to glass London and Washington before you even signed the paper, just to show they could. Evelyn and Croft were watching Roger's face, reading the horror in his eyes as he listened. "So it's over," Roger whispered, closing his eyes. "We lost." "No, Roger, listen to me," Higgins said, leaning closer to the camera. The intense, almost manic energy in the young captain's eyes forced Roger to open his own. "You need to understand what just happened. The president didn't tell you. She couldn't tell you. If the Concordat's empaths had read even a hint of deception on your face, they would have known. You had to believe we were helpless." Roger frowned, confusion warring with the dread. "Believe? Gregory, we are helpless. What did the president do?" "Operation Icarus wasn't an evacuation protocol, Roger. Dr. Miller and his team down in DARPA, they didn't just build a new shield generator. They built a trap. For the last 6 months, we've been deliberately leaking false telemetry about our sensor grid blind spots. We funneled their armada exactly where we wanted them. When the Concordat fleet dropped out of slip space near Jupiter, we didn't fire missiles." Higgins paused, swallowing hard. "We detonated a focused gravity shear singularity, a localized black hole, Ambassador. We hijacked Jupiter's gravitational field, inverted it using the prototype dark matter drives, and turned the entire sector into a spatial shredder." Roger stopped breathing. The datapad nearly slipped from his fingers. "A singularity? That's theoretical. The energy required." "We used Jupiter's core, sir," Higgins replied. "The Concordat Armada, all 300 capital ships, their dreadnoughts, their carrier groups, they were caught in the event horizon of a manufactured gravity well. The spatial shear tore the fleet apart at an atomic level in less than 40 seconds. The Kalanid flagship, Fleet Commander Vreen's command vessels, they're gone. Just dust and echoes." Silence reigned in the small bunker. Roger's mind reeled, trying to process the magnitude of the information. Humanity hadn't just repelled the attack. They had just annihilated the largest military force the galaxy had ever seen in a matter of seconds. "What is our status?" Roger asked, his voice suddenly sounding very far away. "Earth is secure. The trap collapsed in on itself, as designed. Jupiter's orbit shifted by a fraction of a degree, but we're stable. Here is the President's direct order. Ambassador." Higgins leaned in, his expression hardening into cold steel. "You are to inform the Concordat Council that the Terran Coalition is no longer entertaining terms of surrender. You are to walk out of that room. You are coming home, Roger." The feed cut out, replaced by a blinking Terran Coalition crest. Roger slowly lowered the datapad. He sat perfectly still for 10 seconds. The crushing weight that had been compressing his chest, the suffocating fear that had defined his existence for 4 years, simply evaporated. It was replaced by something entirely different. A cold, terrifying clarity. A profound, almost clinical detachment. "Roger?" Evelyn asked, stepping forward, her eyes wide with concern. "What happened? Did they strike?" Roger stood up. He looked at Evelyn, then at General Croft. The posture of the defeated diplomat was gone. He stood taller, his shoulders squared. He reached up and adjusted the collar of his suit jacket. "General," Roger said, his voice quiet, lacking any of its previous desperation. "How many ships does the Kalanid hegemony have in reserve, outside of the fleet stationed at our border?" Croft blinked, confused by the question. "None that matter. They committed 80% of their entire naval strength to the Sol blockade. It was a show of force to intimidate the rest of the Concordat. Why? And without that fleet," Roger continued smoothly, "how long until the other Concordat species, the ones the Kalanids have been oppressing for centuries, rise up in rebellion?" Evelyn gasped, stepping back. "Roger, what did we do?" Roger looked at them both, a grim, humorless smile touching the corner of his mouth. "We didn't just win the war, Dr. Wright. We just decapitated the Kalanid hegemony. Now, if you'll excuse me, I believe we have an appointment to cancel." The doors to the Grand Chamber didn't just open, they unsealed with a definitive, hollow hiss. The Terran delegation stood up in perfect, terrifying unison. They weren't retreating, they weren't surrendering. As Ambassador Rhodes buttoned his jacket, the Alien Council suddenly realized the humans had just stopped playing by the rules. High Minister Xylar looked up from his own datapad, his indigo scales shimmering with smug anticipation. Only 20 minutes had passed of the allotted hour. The quick return of the humans could only mean one thing: absolute capitulation. "Ah, Ambassador Rhodes," Xylar said smoothly, motioning to the glowing holographic accords in the center of the table. "I see reason has prevailed over your species' inherent stubbornness. A wise choice. Have your leaders authorized your signature?" Roger Rhodes walked slowly toward the table, but he did not sit down. General Croft and Dr. Wright stood flanking him, their expressions unreadable masks of stone. The chamber was dead silent, the dozens of alien delegates watching the humans with a mixture of pity and contempt. Roger reached out, but he didn't touch the accords. Instead, he placed his own datapad on the obsidian glass. With a flick of his finger, he projected a massive, three-dimensional holographic map into the center of the room. It was a live telemetry feed of the Sol system, specifically the space around the gas giant Jupiter. "I am not here to sign anything, High Minister," Roger said. His voice echoed through the vast chamber, stripped of all diplomatic deference. It was the voice of a man delivering a eulogy. Xylar's scales flickered with a brief flash of yellow confusion. "Then why have you returned early?" "Do not test my patience, human. The hour is a courtesy." "The Armada." "The Armada is exactly why I am here," Roger interrupted, his voice cutting through the Kalanid's synthesized speech like a knife. The sheer audacity of the interruption caused a ripple of shocked murmurs to sweep through the alien delegates. Humans did not interrupt the High Minister. Not ever. Fleet Commander Vreen, the mantis-like military leader, clicked his mandibles aggressively. "You dare project your primitive tactical maps in this chamber? We know where our ships are, Ambassador." "Do you?" Roger asked softly. He tapped a command on his pad. "Because my government just received some rather interesting sensor data. It seems your fleet commander couldn't wait for the hour to expire. Your Armada initiated a slipspace jump into the Sol system 22 minutes ago. You intended to strike our capital before I even put pen to paper, a violation of the very accords you demand I sign." Xylar's scales turned a deep, angry crimson. He did not deny the accusation. "A precautionary maneuver to ensure compliance. It matters not. If they are in your system, then your doom is already sealed. Surrender now, or I will give the order to begin the orbital bombardment." "That will be difficult, High Minister," Roger replied, his eyes locked dead onto the alien leader. He tapped another button. The holographic projection of Jupiter zoomed in. Where there should have been a massive, imposing formation of 300 Concordat capital ships, there was nothing but a sprawling, chaotic debris field. Millions of jagged fragments of kalinid alloy, shattered engine nacelles, and frozen reactor cores floated aimlessly in the vacuum of space, caught in the immense gravitational pull of the gas giant. The chamber fell into a deafening silence. The alien delegates stared at the projection, their various respiratory and optical organs twitching in sheer disbelief. "This is a fabrication," Vreen hissed, slamming a spiked forearm onto the table. "A cheap Terran trick. Holographic manipulation. Our fleet is invincible. They possess kinetic shielding that your primitive missiles cannot scratch." "You're right, Commander," Roger said, his tone conversational, chillingly calm. "Our missiles couldn't scratch them, so we didn't use missiles. You view humanity as primitive because we lack your elegant plasma weaponry and your ancient slipspace gates. But you underestimated our capacity for desperate, unbridled engineering." Roger leaned forward, resting his palms on the edge of the table. He looked around the room, making eye contact with every alien species that had voted for Earth's destruction. "We knew we couldn't beat you in a conventional firefight. So, our scientists down in DARPA decided to weaponize the cosmos itself. We leaked false intel. We baited your invincible armada into a kill box near our largest gas giant. And when all 300 of your magnificent ships dropped out of slipspace," Roger paused, letting the silence stretch out, heavy and lethal. "We ignited a localized gravitational singularity. We essentially folded space-time around your fleet using Jupiter's mass." Xylar stared at the human, his crimson scales rapidly draining of color, turning a sickly, pale gray. "A singularity. Impossible. You would have destroyed your own system. The sheer mathematical complexity. You do not possess the intellect." "We possess the will to survive, High Minister," Roger corrected him coldly. "It took exactly 42 seconds for the gravity shear to rip your entire fleet down to its molecular components. 300 ships, 2 million of your finest soldiers, gone, in less time than it takes you to pour a glass of water. Chaos erupted in the pavilion. Delegates from the minor species began shouting, their translation collars creating a cacophony of panicked synthesizers. If what the human said was true, the Kalanid hegemony had just lost the core of its military might. The balance of power in the galaxy hadn't just shifted, it had completely inverted. Lies, Xylar bellowed, rising to his full, towering height. Comms officer! Ping the flagship! Ping fleet command instantly! An aide in the corner frantically tapped at a massive console. Seconds ticked by. The aide's multifaceted eyes widened in sheer terror. High Minister, there is no signal. The entire Sol network is dead. I am scanning the telemetry buoy at the Oort cloud. There is massive exotic radiation consistent with a spatial collapse. Sir, the fleet is gone. Xylar collapsed back into his chair as if his spine had been removed. His jaw worked silently. Vreen let out a horrifying, high-pitched screech of mourning and rage, his mandibles clicking frantically. Roger Rhodes stood up straight and picked up his datapad. We came to this table prepared to sacrifice everything for peace, Roger said, his voice booming over the panicked alien chatter. The room instantly fell quiet again, every alien entity hanging on the human's words. We were willing to give you our ships, our resources, our pride, but you wanted our humanity. You wanted us broken. Roger reached out and tapped the holographic accords. The projection fizzled and died. The Terran Coalition is officially withdrawing from these peace talks, Roger announced. He turned his back on the High Minister of the Galactic Concordat. It was the ultimate insult, a gesture of supreme dominance. General Croft and Dr. Wright fell into step beside him. Wait, Xylar choked out, his voice a ragged whisper. Rhodes, Ambassador, if you leave this table, it means total war. We still have the orbital defense grid. We still have the core worlds. Roger stopped at the massive blast doors. He didn't turn around. He simply looked over his shoulder, his profile illuminated by the cold lights of the pavilion. No, Xylar, Roger said softly. It doesn't mean war. War implies a contest. What happens next is a reckoning. Earth is no longer contained. And if I were you, I would start fortifying those core worlds. With that, the human delegation stepped through the doors. The heavy steel sealed shut behind them with a final echoing clang, locking the alien leaders in a tomb of their own making. The Zenith Pavilion's grand concourse was a masterpiece of extraterrestrial architecture, a sprawling 2-kilometer promenade of vaulted glass and luminescent flora designed to awe lesser species into compliance. For 4 years, humans had walked these halls with their heads bowed, treated as an unwanted infestation. Today, Ambassador Roger Rhodes, General Thomas Croft, and Dr. Evelyn Wright walked down the center of the concourse, and the crowd parted for them like water, retreating from a tremor. Word travels faster than light on a space station wired with telepathic relays and sub-ether comms. The delegates in the Grand Chamber had already begun frantic transmissions to their homeworlds. The impossible had happened. The Kalanid Armada, the invincible fist of the Galactic Concordat, had been vaporized by a species that hadn't even mastered localized gravity plating. As Roger walked, his face an unreadable mask of diplomatic stoicism, he could see the shift in the alien eyes around them. The pity was gone. The contempt had evaporated. In their place was something raw, primal, and deeply satisfying. Absolute terror. Keep a measured pace, Roger murmured, barely moving his lips. Do not run. We are not fleeing. We are departing. I've got my hand on my sidearm, Roger, General Croft replied, his eyes scanning the vaulted catwalks above them. Vreen isn't going to just let us walk out of here. He's a tactical pragmatist, but he's also a prideful insect. We just humiliated him in front of the entire galaxy. Let him try, Evelyn said. Her voice was uncharacteristically cold, her hands tucked neatly into the pockets of her tailored suit. Bradley Stanton's team at Cyber Command didn't just send us here with an encrypted datapad. Before Croft could ask what she meant, a harsh, blaring klaxon echoed through the concourse. The soft, ambient light of the pavilion suddenly shifted to a glaring, tactical red. Ahead of them, blocking the entrance to Hangar Bay 4, where their diplomatic corvette, the UNS Churchill, was docked, stood a phalanx of Concordat security forces. There were 20 of them hulking reptilian Brindari mercenaries clad in heavy kinetic armor, armed with plasma rifles leveled directly at the Terran delegation. A holographic projector flickered to life above the barricade, displaying the furious, mandibled face of Fleet Commander Vreen. Ambassador Rhodes, you are in violation of concordate law by withdrawing from a mandated peace summit. Your vessel has been impounded. You and your delegation are hereby detained under suspicion of deploying illegal, world-ending armaments. Surrender now, or you will be pacified with lethal force. The Brundari guards racked their plasma rifles in unison, a terrifying, synchronized whine of charging energy. Roger stopped. He was 20 paces from the firing squad. He didn't raise his hands. He looked at the holographic projection of Vreen, then sighed softly, the sound picked up perfectly by the concourse's acoustic dampeners. Evelyn, Roger said calmly. Would you mind? With pleasure, Ambassador, Evelyn replied. She retrieved a sleek black cylinder from her pocket. It looked no larger than a standard digital pen. She twisted the top, pressed her thumb against the biometric scanner, and tossed it onto the polished obsidian floor. It rolled to a stop halfway between the humans and the barricade. Vreen's laugh clicked through the speakers. A kinetic grenade? You think a single explosive will breach heavy armor? You are fools. It's not an explosive, Commander, Evelyn said, her voice echoing clearly. We call it the Cerberus Protocol, developed by Dr. Aaron Mitchell at MIT. It's a localized quantum state logic bomb. Your systems are highly advanced, tightly integrated, and entirely reliant on central AI oversight, which makes them painfully vulnerable to a brute force contradiction. A single high-pitched ping emitted from the cylinder. Instantly, the Kalinid network collapsed. It didn't just shut down, it violently rebelled. The Zenith Pavilion's lights shattered into total darkness. A microsecond later, emergency strobes flickered weakly. But the lights were the least of the guards' problems. The heavy kinetic armor worn by the Brundari mercenaries relied on magnetic field stabilization to offset the massive weight of the plating. The Cerberus Protocol inverted the polarity of their armor suits. With a chorus of sickening crunches, the 20 heavily armed guards were suddenly pinned to the floor, their own armor crushing them under a localized, inescapable magnetic weight. They dropped their rifles, gasping for breath, completely immobilized. The holographic projection of Vreen glitched, his voice slowing down into a demonic, distorted drawl before the projector exploded in a shower of sparks. The airlocks to the hangar have been overridden, Evelyn reported, checking her datapad in the dim emergency lighting. The Churchill is decoupled from the station's manifest. We are clear. General Croft let out a low whistle, looking at the groaning alien mercenaries pinned to the floor. Remind me to buy Dr. Mitchell a bottle of scotch when we get back to Washington. Keep moving, Roger said, stepping casually over a dropped plasma rifle. They entered the docking umbilicus. The heavy blast doors of Hangar Bay force-sealed behind them, locking the chaos of the Zenith Pavilion away. As they stepped aboard the UNS Churchill, Captain David Adler was already waiting in the airlock, his flight crew scrambling through the corridors. Ambassador! General! Captain Adler saluted sharply. We detected the station's grid failure. Are we under attack? We are going home, Captain, Roger said, brushing past him toward the bridge. Spin up the dark matter drives. Do not request clearance from orbital traffic control. Just punch a hole in the fabric and get us to Earth. Sir, without clearance, the station's automated defense turrets will track us. General Croft smiled a terrifying, wolfish grin. Son, the station doesn't have a network anymore. And even if they did, there isn't an alien on this rock with the spine to pull the trigger on us today. Hit the gas. 10 minutes later, the UNS Churchill detached from the Zenith Pavilion. It didn't perform the slow, elegant sublight burn standard for diplomatic vessels. Instead, it executed a brutal, violently fast acceleration maneuver. The ship's dark matter drive tore a jagged, glowing blue rift into the vacuum of space, folding the dimensions around it, and vanished, leaving nothing but a shockwave that rattled the glass of the pavilion. Humanity had left the table, and they had taken the power with them. The fallout was not merely political, it was tectonic. When the UNS Churchill dropped out of slipspace over Earth, it was greeted not by a burning, blockaded planet, but by a sky clear of alien aggressors. The debris field near Jupiter was already being scoured by Terran salvage crews, pulling apart the molecular wreckage of the Kalinid Armada to reverse engineer their plasma tech and ancient shielding. Inside the Cheyenne Mountain complex, Roger Rhodes finally allowed the adrenaline to leave his body. He sat in the Oval Office set up within the bunker across from President Elizabeth Harrison. President Harrison was a woman who had aged 20 years in the 4 years of her term. The war had carved deep lines into her face. But today, her eyes held a fierce, unrelenting light. She poured 2 glasses of aged bourbon, sliding one across the heavy oak desk to Roger. "They're calling it the Jupiter anomaly on the alien sub-ether channels," Harrison said, taking a sip. "Our intelligence operatives in the Orion Spur are reporting mass panic. The Kalanid hegemony is in total freefall." Roger picked up his glass, the amber liquid warming his tired bones. "Xylar is an arrogant leader, Madam President, but he is not stupid. He knows his power relied entirely on the projection of invincibility. We didn't just break his fleet, we broke the illusion." He was right. The intelligence reports flooding in over the next 3 weeks painted a picture of a galaxy tearing itself apart to restructure around a massive power vacuum. For centuries, the Kalanid hegemony had maintained the Galactic Concordat through fear, subjugating minor species like the avian Corvians and the subterranean Lydians, forcing them to supply raw materials and tribute. The Sol blockade had required 80% of the hegemony's naval strength. With that fleet pulverized into cosmic dust in 42 seconds, the vassal states saw their chance. The rebellions began on the industrial world of Zeal. The Lydians overthrew their Kalanid overseers using nothing but mining lasers and sheer numbers. 3 days later, the Corvian star system declared absolute independence, seizing Kalanid supply depots. High Minister Xylar, once the terrifying supreme voice of the galaxy, was ousted in a violent coup by his own military tribunal, led by a disgraced and furious Commander Vreen. The Concordat was fractured, bleeding, and looking for a new center of gravity. They looked toward Earth. "We are receiving diplomatic pings, Roger," President Harrison said, leaning back in her chair. She pulled up a holographic interface, showing a list of over 40 different alien delegations requesting communication. The Corvians. The Lydians. Even a faction of Kalanid separatists. They are begging for military alliances. They want our dark matter tech. They want our protection. "And what will we give them?" Roger asked softly. Harrison set her glass down. "We will give them trade agreements. We will give them medical supplies. But we will not give them our technology. And we will not fight their wars for them. We are not replacing the Kalanids as the new tyrants of the galaxy." "We will be isolationists, then?" "No," Croft's voice echoed as he stepped into the room, his uniform impeccable, his chest heavy with medals. "We will be untouchable. We build our defense grid. We mine the asteroid belts. We rebuild London, we rebuild Washington, and we rebuild the Sirius colonies. We let the galaxy know that Earth's borders are open for business, but closed to warships." Roger nodded slowly. He thought of his daughter, Sarah. He had seen her yesterday, exhausted but smiling, closing down the triage centers because the wounded were finally stabilizing and no new casualties were coming in. The war was over. Humanity had survived the fire, and in doing so, had forged themselves into something unbreakable. 3 months later, the Zenith Pavilion had been abandoned by the Kalanids, claimed by a coalition of independent species trying to salvage a new democratic council. They sent a formal invitation to Earth, requesting a Terran ambassador to sit at the head of the table, to guide the new galactic order. President Harrison stood before a global broadcast, her image relayed across the Sol system and beamed out into the deep black of the Orion Spur, uncoded, for every alien comms array to intercept. "To the species of the Galactic Concordat, and to the independent stars beyond, Earth hears your requests. We see the chaos left in the wake of the Kalanid collapse. We fought for our right to exist, and we paid for our survival in blood, in ash, and in the fires of Jupiter. We do not seek to rule the stars. Humanity desires peace, trade, and mutual prosperity. But let the ashes of the Kalanid Armada serve as a permanent monument to our resolve. We are a species of builders, of dreamers, and of diplomats. But push us to the edge of the abyss, and you will find that we do not fall. We simply redefine gravity." In his office, overlooking the rebuilt skyline of Geneva, Ambassador Roger Rhodes watched the broadcast conclude. He turned off his datapad, stood up, and looked out the window. The sky was a brilliant, untroubled blue. For the first time in 4 years, the radar screens at Earth Defense Command were entirely, perfectly clear. The galaxy was watching Earth, but they were no longer watching with contempt or even with fear. They were watching with profound, absolute respect, because humanity had walked away from the table of surrender and built a throne out of their own survival. And that concludes the epic tale of how humanity refused to bow down and completely redefined the balance of power in the galaxy. If you loved this story of Terran defiance and the incredible trap at Jupiter, please smash that like button and share it with your fellow sci-fi fans. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell for more thrilling HFY stories where humans prove they are an unstoppable force. See you next time!
Hi, my name is Tran Truong, the owner and manager of Palace Truths. After watching the video, Galactic leaders watch in horror as humans depart from Peace Talk's HFY sci-fi story. I'd really like to know what you think. How did this story make you feel? The feeling that stayed with me most was determination. This story wasn't really about winning a battle. It was about refusing to give up your future when the odds seem impossible. Watching humanity stand at the edge of defeat and still find the courage to make its own choice made the ending feel especially satisfying. I'm curious what part had the biggest impact on you. Was it the tense negotiation itself, the moment the truth about the fleet was revealed, or the decision to walk away from a deal that demanded too much? And do you think there was ever a point where peaceful compromise was still possible? One thing I took from this story is that difficult situations sometimes require clear boundaries. In everyday life, that might mean speaking up respectfully when something doesn't feel right, instead of agreeing just to avoid conflict. If this story gave you something to think about, I'd love to hear your perspective in the comments. And if you enjoy HFY stories about resilience, strategy, and human resolve, feel free to like the video or subscribe if you'd like to see more journeys like this.